What about you, Tim? What turns it on for you? What turns you on?
So like, where are we starting? I have about 10 minutes, just so you know.
Well, let's quickly do the flying man with
Okay.
you.
Okay. Go.
Do you accept what most? I'll compare you to Jonathan McClatchy. Do you accept the stuff he accepts?
I'm much more of a maximalist than a minimalist. I don't think. Yeah.
Okay. So if all you had was the Old Testament and Paul's letters, would you believe Jesus rose from the dead?
No.
Okay. Would you, if we add on the Gospel of Mark, would you believe?
We got the whole Gospel of Mark. We got the whole
nothing else. Plus what I just mentioned, Paul's letters.
Okay. Would I believe that Jesus rose from the dead? No, but
don't say but, Tim. He just wants a yes or no answer.
Yeah, I know.
But.
I would not, but I would not. My confidence would not be over 50% that Jesus.
Okay, but let me ask you this: is your confidence higher?
Yes.
By a lot or a little?
I don't know. So I'm trying to think of not like precise numbers in my head, but I'm just sort of So if we have the stuff in Paul, we've got Paul's experience, we've got things with regards to that. The Old Testament context, and then we've got Jesus. We've got the stuff of Jesus's. We've got some sort of a color coming into the background here with regards to Jesus.
You're a numbers guy, right?
Yeah.
So let's forget about words. We got Paul's letters, 0 to 100. 100 meaning you fully certain believe it. Where are you at with just the claim of Jesus rising from the dead and Paul's letters? Give me a number.
So it depends on how much we're going into do I have
Old Testament plus Paul's letters, nothing
have I been able to update the priors in light of
give me a number of your belief. You got the Old Testament and Paul's letters. 0 is you don't believe it at all. Your confidence is very, very low.
I would say between 0 and 5, between 1 and 5 or something.
You're between 1 and 5.
Yeah.
We add on the Gospel of Mark. Update the number.
So I would probably put I'd 3 to 1 somewhere in there. 25%, 3 to 1 somewhere in there.
So you went from 1 to 5% to 25%?
Yeah, I would say so.
Okay. Now let's add.
Because you've got you've not only got the empty tomb.
Well, you don't have to explain.
Okay.
Well,
that's fair. That's fair.
Now we add in the Gospel of Matthew.
I'm problematic eschatology in Jesus. 35. Yeah, I think it raises a little bit, but not.
Okay,
not
so
more
25 to 35-ish.
Yeah, but maybe a little bit more, but probably I would say somewhere 30, 40, somewhere in there.
Oh, 30, 40s.
Yeah, I would say it raises no more than 10%. So if I'm gonna get 25 or I would say 35% or so.
Okay, now let's add in Luke, but not Acts, just Luke.
Not Acts. Okay, that's interesting. So how much is there?
So you're at 35 now.
Yeah, I'd have to think about that one a little bit more, but I think I would probably you get a little more than Matthew, but I'd be close to 50-50. Maybe I would be seriously okay, this has some legs, probably close to 50-50. Add an Act, and I think we're above.
Okay, you're like Chris Gadsden, that guy I interviewed. It's like a linear function for you with a one.
No,
slope.
I mean, oh man, I really wasn't trying to.
I know, but that's how it ended up, right?
Yeah. I think that, I think it was surprising though that with Mark, right, that you thought that I went from 0 to 5 to 4 to 1 or
okay,
so.
That's interesting. Now let's get into the weeds a little bit.
Yeah.
You only a 5%, 1 to 5% confidence from Paul, who
I just
refers to himself in the first person. I, Paul.
Yeah.
Said Jesus appeared to him. Why is that?
Who's
so
Jesus
low?
though? Who is this guy?
Paul. You got all Paul's letters. Paul goes into who Jesus is.
Is Jesus into magic?
He is a
servant.
He became nothing. He was a servant of God. Paul has one of the highest views of Jesus. He has a higher view of Jesus than Mark and Matthew.
Yeah. I probably agree there, but I don't know who Jesus is. I don't know anything about this guy. We've got somebody who we don't know.
Paul says that Jesus was sent to die for the sins of the world, and he appeared to the 500 and to him and the 12.
Yeah.
As through one man, all died.
So my question
through one
is,
man.
here you have a man named Paul who has given you who Jesus is.
In very like vague terms, like we don't really know. Was
And
he-
don't forget that Paul is receiving lashes for proclaiming this,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. He's
And
being
he was the
persecuted.
Pharisee of Pharisees. So what's going on with this Jesus guy? How do you explain that?
So we have this.
I mean, I guess it's fairly interesting, but without Acts, how much? I mean, I think that there's something interesting there, but I don't. Yeah, again, it's not that it has zero weight, but it's not anything that really I can attach.
But you're saying that just because Paul says that Jesus appeared to these people and to him personally, that's not enough for you? That's only like 1 to 5%.
I mean, you still have the whole thing with the thing with Galatians 1 that tells us. I mean, I wouldn't be a mythicist. I mean, I wouldn't be a mythicist. I would.
But Tim,
I
this
would,
is the beauty of the blind
Yeah.
man, because you're seeing there's I'm going to psychologize you a little bit, but I'm sensing a little bit of cognitive dissonance here, because Camille and I are making some good points that almost everything you have in the Gospels is in Paul already. And not only that,
I don't think so.
it's sooner, it's first person account, and yet you were only 1 to 5%. And he was persecuted more than, let's say, Matthew. So
Yeah,
why
so-
are you so low on Paul?
Okay, so I don't. So the number was something I would attach some importance to here. Would be the whole context of Jesus's life. So in Mark, you get a much better flavor of who Jesus is, and that this isn't just some person. Then you've also got the burial and empty tomb. We know he had 12 followers.
Yeah, but
you
if the
get
point of
color to
Christian-
the story.
Tim, I
Yeah.
understand that
Yeah.
the Gospels fill out like
Yeah.
Jesus was a carpenter, he walked on this city and that city, but the important stuff about Christianity is already in Paul. Yes,
The important stuff in Christianity. I mean, I think that
that he was
but
God,
see,
he
I
died,
think
he
that-
rose.
I think that when you isolate Paul from the Gospels, though, if you just have Paul, I think that in conjunction you get. I think that if you look back, you can say, yeah, in Paul that we do have this high Christology, and we do have this. But I think you need both Paul and the Gospels for that context to make any sense.
But what I'm hearing is you really don't believe Paul if that's all you had.
No, I don't think I would believe that. What would I believe? I wouldn't believe that Jesus rose from the dead.
You're
No.
saying that a personal testimony of an experience of Jesus appearing to someone is not good enough.
Yeah, I don't think that I would believe that. Because I don't have it. I have the details and Acts.
now,
I don't have anything from Paul.
Why would it be good enough in the Gospels when it's written later as a third party witness?
Well, I think
why is that
yeah,
better than Paul?
I think that the details in I think the details in the appearances, in addition to sort of adding that the religious context of Jesus' ministry and whatnot, I think all of that helps in significant ways. Especially when you add in the details of the appearances and multiple.
Don't you find that
appearances in
interesting?
different
Like even
places.
as a Christian, like I would find this extremely interesting that here we got a guy who identifies himself as the first person, says that Jesus appeared to him, gives a high Christology of Jesus, explains the guts of what's really important, and yet you don't believe him. But then you add in that he was a fisher, or that he was a carpenter, and that he went to certain cities and wore sandals and talked to people. Then automatically, and this is written even later in the third person, then you believe it?
So I think that the Gospels actually, in some roundabout way, would increase my when I look back at Paul. Then, in light of also having the Gospels, again, I think having both really helps. And I think that without one or the other, I don't know. Without Paul, I think that Paul confirms. I think the Gospels help strengthen the testimony of Paul far more than
Okay.
Paul helps strengthen.
I know
the
you have to go
testimony.
soon, so I want to
Yeah.
tie in the flying man.
Sure.
If we had a creed and similar to letters of Paul for the flying man, would you be 1 to 5% that my ancestor actually flew?
That Paul, in this person, we had reason to think that this person was persecuted. We have all the letters. You're saying all the letters
Yeah.
of the flying
So
man.
imagine we have something similar
Yeah,
to
I would,
Paul's
I,
letters.
I would attach somewhat. You know, I would have somewhat of a credence that you know.
Okay,
that
you'd
this
be 1 to
person
5%.
claiming something.
Okay.
Yeah, probably.
Okay, but now imagine for my ancestor, the flying man, that another 10, 20, 30, 40 years later, there's these diaries written about him that goes into what my ancestor did for a living, who his friends were, names of cities and peoples and places, things he did.
Exposition of his teaching and all of these things.
Claims of other types of miracles. Would your credence that my ancestor
With an
actually flew,
not an empty tomb, but like an empty hangar, like you know, like
the spot where he took off from the Grand Canyon was
you know,
found empty?
whatever, something like that in that particular context. Yeah, I mean, I think that would be, I think that would increase it, and then you have still got the letters as well, so I can add
Increase it by like 20% more.
Yeah, would it go
Yeah,
up
I
15%
think
for each
so. I
diary?
think that if we added the context and we still have both, I think that I think that gives some real legs to.
Seriously, think
having
about
the
this.
second.
I'm
Yeah.
making the claim that my ancestor ran, jumped, and flew across the Grand Canyon unaided,
It was in Phoenix, Arizona, right, Doug?
and then Grand Canyon.
Oh,
Yeah, and that's north. Oh yeah, you don't.
yeah,
know.
yeah.
Like really think about this, Tim. About this is a serious claim, and now I tell you, decades later, anonymous authors write these diaries, but there's traditions of who wrote them with more detail. Would you seriously bump up 15% each for each diary?
I don't think again. I think that we're going to go with more later. But the thing with Mark, I think that if you've got whatever we're going to call the gospel, the first gospel of the flying man, I think that would adding the context that would significantly raise my.
And by the fourth diary, you now believe he flies?
I think by the third diary, in addition to the history of the Church of the Flying Man.
Okay, now you're being consistent.
Yeah.
But I wonder if you're being consistent because you feel you have to.
I don't think so. I really don't. So I do think that the only place where, because again, I think it's important here to talk about the evidence as I think that I'm sort of adding up the strength of the testimonial evidence here, and I think that a lot of this is going to get parsed out in this prior.
You are indeed adding testimonial evidence.
Yeah. I think that a lot of it also gets parsed out in the priors with regards to the flying man. So if we're gonna sort of separate that, then perhaps my initial credibility in the flying man is going to be a lot lower than this, unless I'm allowed to update my priors as I am for Christianity in the same way.
Okay, what if I now told you that my flying ancestor never did fly, but everything within the thought experiment we actually have the manuscripts, we have the historical research on it, thousands of years, we have the genres all laid out, but I told you no, he still never flew. How would you explain what we see as evidence for the flying?
So I think that I would probably start with thinking about the lying hypothesis, that these people were, that there was some degree of maybe not like overt deception in our context, but that that there was knowledge that this was not something that actually happened, and they're telling stories in a particular way for various reasons.
What if I told you that in this culture and genre of writing, this was very expected back then, that the people who were famous were often deified, and these types of stories were made up about them? Would you consider that lying?
I don't know if that's lying, or one would have to go into a lot more detail there about what the actual cognitive state of the person is. But
Yes.
I think there would be some degree of deliberate. It depends on how deliberate that deception is, right? People.
But it's in a
talk about
culture of
sexualization.
it's in a culture of that this is expected that
but
this
you
happens.
still have to.
That's even how you do history. You could read the signs and things. That would be the historical method.
Okay, now Jesus never rose from the dead, but we have the New Testament exactly as we see it today. Explain how that could happen.
Yeah, so I think that if Jesus didn't rise from the dead, I think that the probability we'd have the New Testament is really low.
But in this thought experiment, I've told
Okay, right.
you
So
that-
this is the thing where like somehow God has told me, hey, guess what? You have to figure out this puzzle because Jesus didn't rise from the dead. And how else do you explain this data, right?
yeah, we have the New Testament
Yeah.
exactly as we have it today, and all the other.
So I think
manuscript
that
evidence.
something that's really important that I would hone in on here is the expectation that you'd get from the predictions of Jesus's death, and I think that could charge either sort of a
What do you think the authors of the New Testament thought Jesus was going to do with his ministry?
sorry,
Did they
can you repeat that?
The eyewitnesses to Jesus' ministry.
Yeah,
Do you think that they thought that he was going to rise from the dead?
before he rose from the dead. I don't know. I don't think they did. I think that what happened with the Passion predictions is that after the resurrection occurred, they read. I mean, I think that Jesus' Passion predictions were actually pretty vague, and that they read a lot more into them in light of what they experienced then. I think that looking back, I think they saw something more clear in his Passion predictions than what actually he predicted.
We really haven't got an answer yet, though, Nathan. I really want to get an answer from you. Jesus did not rise from the dead. New
Oh,
Testament,
sorry, yeah.
exactly. What's some? You don't have to just pick list some.
Okay, so
possible
I would
explanations.
lean towards, again, I think that this expectation surrounding the predictions could have charged either sort of this group religious experience or a culture in which they would have thought, hey, you know, we're gonna lie for a good purpose, essentially. And that's crudely put, but I think
Okay.
I would lean towards one of those two.
No, it has what that I think that's a good explanation. They had some type of cognitive dissonance, and they were willing to lie in quotes to solve a problem that they had emotionally, internally. They might have had some type of experience, but it never really happened. Do we see that in history?
Yes, I think so.
How often? A lot or little? When it comes to religion, do we see that often? Or
I think that's pretty common. Yeah.
it's pretty common. That explanation that you gave is pretty common. I agree with you. I agree with you.
I don't really think that's much of a mic drop, though, because I think you're going to say, so that is that thing which is really common in religious circles more probable than someone rising from the dead? Is someone rising from the dead more or less likely than that?
Well, you answer your own question. Well, you just said that it's very common for false religions to have this type of explanation. So now let me ask you, which is more probable, that explanation that you just gave, or that a man actually rose from the dead?
I think that more probable that someone I think that Jesus rose from the dead. Yeah, I think it's a specific person. I think that it's more likely that Jesus rose from the dead than that we have that in this case for Christianity.
Do you think it's more likely that a specific person named Muhammad actually received revelation from Allah in a cave? That specific person
Over who though? Like over some random
over anybody else?
Yeah, so there's two
Yeah, I think
propositions, right?
Yeah, I think I would say it's more likely that Muhammad did than.
Well, hang on. Here's two propositions. One proposition is someone received revelation from God, right? And the other proposition is someone, and that someone is called Muhammad, received revelation from
just
God.
his name. No.
Can we make the caveat that if they're going to marry a 9-year-old, that probably hurts?
Well, I'm good.
Well, no, it's literally a conjunction, right, of propositions. So you've got one that's general and one that's a subset of the other one.
Yeah.
So that how does that affect the probability?
Just the name Muhammad, or are we attaching?
No, everything that attaches with it.
So I think initially I would say that with Muhammad, I think I'd be less surprised if God performed a miracle on Muhammad than on some random person initially. Then, upon, the more you learn, the more you discover, I'd actually be really surprised if God performed a miracle in relation to Muhammad, given what I consider to be, a real ethical problems. And, I think that Allah is metaphysically incoherent. Like, I think that there are real problems.
I know, but the explanation you gave earlier, I think, was perfect. You remember we're talking about the false religions, and you gave an explanation for kind of.
Yeah, but I think that I would still ask the question about the priors first. Is that I think that for a lot of these, religious leaders as well, I think that initially, is it more probable than for some random person that God would perform a miracle?
Right, but none of the evidence for Islam overcomes that low prior, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Right.
well, low prior, but I think the prior is raised due to some of the religious
Right,
context.
but the evidence we have can be for Islam can be easily explained by the explanation you gave earlier.
I would probably go a little bit of a different direction.
Like these are stories made by men to
Well,
to fulfill
very
certain-
generally, yeah, very generally.
Yeah, yeah. To me, that's a perfectly good explanation.
Yeah, I mean, then we'd have to sort of marshal what evidence that the Muslim would have in his favor. I don't think there's much for Islam in terms of, if Muhammad didn't have this revelation. I think that I don't think there's much that's really surprising. I don't think that
So if that's a
level of
perfectly good
shock is
explanation
really
for Islam,
surprising.
why isn't it for Christianity?
Because the details are all different.
The details of every religion are somewhat different.
Oh, that's definitely the case, which is why I think we have to evaluate them on their own terms, while still taking into account again we can't evaluate everything. So I think that I think if we sort of
But remember, you said earlier that this explanation happens often in history for false religions, and they're all different. These false religions.
yeah, I
So-
think that's the case.
and Christianity is different than these religions as well. So how does this explanation not fit with Christianity?
Well, because I think that the data strongly confirms the resurrection of Jesus.
But we've already explained the data. You did.
No. I mean, so just because you can form a coherent story doesn't mean that you think that that's the most likely explanation.
But you admitted that your explanation for all these false religions is more likely than, let's say, God actually talking to Muhammad in a cave, or
In specifically
the Buddha
the
being.
for Islam, for sure. Yeah, I think that's definitely the case. And I think that again, we'd have
But Jesus
to
is special.
Yeah, I think that first of all, I'd say Jesus is special because the evidence is good, and so I think that Jesus is special also.
But we've already explained the
for-
evidence.
We haven't explained the evidence. I don't think that we. So
Remember,
I think
I asked you
just
Christianity.
putting together a coherent explanation of the evidence does not make it the most likely explanation.
We've explained the evidence for Christianity by appealing to things that we've seen in history in false religions. And I remember
we've
I asked you.
put together a coherent story. Yeah, I think that is something that could coherently happen. I don't think that makes it the most likely explanation, though.
So something that is very rare is more likely than something that's more common.
Something that's more rare is more likely than something. Well, I think that again, you can't respond to the strength of the likelihood ratio by going to the prior probability and saying that the prior probability is really low. So
But
therefore,
it's expected that if Jesus didn't rise from the dead, just
yeah,
like the
I
other
don't think
false
that.
religions, it's
I
still
don't. I
expected.
wouldn't expect anything to happen if Jesus didn't. rise.
Really?
Yeah, I think that I don't think we would hear anything about Christian. I don't think there'd be Christian religion.
But you do expect the Quran to be written even if Allah didn't speak to Muhammad.
Well, would I expect there to be a religion there?
Or Mormonism.
I think that I would say in Mormonism, I think that it's surprising with regards to Mormonism. With Islam, I'm not entirely sure. I'd have to think about that more.
There's
But
a
I
lot
do
of
think
false
that-
religions in the world.
Yeah.
It's very expected that people make up stories.
Yeah, Tim, can you just establish what you think was the differentiator from what Doug is saying? I'm trying to just understand, like, what is the evidence that you think is relevant that distinguishes between the examples Doug is giving in terms of, like, religions make up stories, religions have this stuff. Is there any symmetry breaker for you, or
Yeah. So the symmetry breaker
priors, or what?
is the two symmetry breakers are, first is that I think that it is not unlikely that God would perform a super miracle on Jesus to vindicate his ministry. And then secondly,
Well, hold on, Tim. Wait, just to
yeah.
clarify, Doug, why do you think that's? I feel like I'm being Doug's apprentice here. Why do you think that's more likely for Jesus than you do think it is for Muhammad or Joseph Smith?
so I think that when you update the prior in light of the historical information about Jesus's ministry, I think that
And what about Jesus' ministry makes it more significant than Muhammad or
But
Joseph
so,
Smith?
hang on. So that's not a prior then, right? That's
Yeah,
a
it's no longer a
posterior.
prior.
no, yes, it is. You can update. I mean, if we talk about Bayesian learning theory, yeah, you're updating your prior.
No.
Updating a prior with
Yeah,
posterior.
But it becomes
In light of new
so it-
information, you are updating.
the prior becomes a posterior in light of the evidence, right? But it's no longer a prior then at that point.
Well, no, you're updating your priors in light of in light of the data, in light of the background knowledge.
But this is logically,
prior, yeah.
right? Logically, this is after we've taken into account the evidence that we're disputing explanations of, right?
Yeah.
And you're saying, so after we've taken that evidence into account, it raises the prior such that after we take that evidence into account again, now the posterior is really high. So you're double counting your evidence, right? You're double.
I don't know. I'm not double counting my evidence because I'm updating that in light of the background knowledge.
Yeah, but that's what you just said. You just said the prior is higher in light of becomes higher after we take into account the evidence. So that means now when we take over the evidence, the prior is high enough that the posterior.
So we would say there are two different sets of evidence.
Which two? Sorry.
One set of evidence is the evidence relevant for the resurrection, and the second set of evidence is just the evidence relevant for like what kind of person Jesus was when he was alive and stuff like that.
Well, I could frame it with Islam again. We update the prior about Muhammad once we learn about was known in business circles as being a very trustworthy man. We update the prior, the miracle, once we see the Quran and the miracle of the Quran. Well, of course, God would use and talk to Muhammad.
I would strongly dispute that with regards to Islam because of the sort of first the negative information, and also because I don't think that is a situation that God is.
There's no negative information in the New Testament.
I think that you could make those arguments, and I think that we need to contend with them. For example, if Jesus is a failed apocalyptic prophet.
And I would actually count the negative information as increasing the prior, right? Because that's like a criterion of embarrassment.
You're dirty, Camille.
No, I mean, like, seriously. I think God working through a prophet who is a sinful person is more probable than him working.
God chose the weak.
Blameless, right?
So, Camille, how would we tell the difference between a really fallible prophet versus someone who's just a con artist who is lying about God working through them?
Well, that's a separate question, right?
Right. It's a relevant question, though. I'm just curious.
Through miracles.
Well, but wouldn't that hurt the credibility of the miracle if the person's not very reputable?
God uses any means.
I'm just saying, I think we'd all be very skeptical of Kenneth Copeland or Benny Hinn doing a miracle, even within that, just because of what they've done in the past.
People were skeptical of David killing Goliath, and yet he did.
God's ways are higher than your ways, Caleb.
Yeah, maybe, but I don't think that's
it doesn't have to make sense to you. It's more spiritual.
Actually, the example I gave of David and Goliath is a good example of how this kind of all crumbles with. Well, Jesus was this famous guy who God would use and validify through his resurrection, because he did all these miracles. No, God has a history of choosing the weak and the most unexpected.
That's a really good point. I remember you mentioned that in the debate between Camille and Blake Junta.
I didn't know they debated.
Yeah.
Well, not really a formal debate. Just
they just had a long discussion type of thing.
Watch that then.
That was really good. I think you still get that with Jesus. I think you still can get that with Jesus.
And also,
where Jesus is still.
I'm not actually sure that you can update the prior with the information about what kind of person Jesus was, because I think we would have those descriptions even if that wasn't actually who Jesus was, right? Because I like, on my view, I can explain.
Well, right.
I can explain the description of Jesus' characters as essentially being constructed. Like, the Gospels depict Jesus as being the kind of person who God would raise because they were written by people who already believed that Jesus was raised.
Sounds like the Jesus seminar.
I quite agree, but I'm going to have to go. But I think that I heard it once said, and I think that this is sort of stuck with me, that it sort of takes a Jesus to make a Jesus. And this is not something that I can, and I'm going to sound, it's super unanalytic here, so there's like a thing, but like, I don't really know how to describe it, other than like it just seems to me the case that that Jesus is not. Just narratively, it seems to me that Jesus as this moral exemplar, and where his message sort of fits as the centerpiece of human history in a number of ways. I think that.
Do you think that has anything to do with being a committed Christian, that you see it that way?
Well, I think
Yeah.
that they sort of play into each other. I think that's the case. That maybe if I didn't have that sort of background, I wouldn't believe that. But that doesn't change the fact that I think that really is the case.
Yeah, I know
you
you
know,
think
that
it,
makes
but
sense.
what
I
I'm
think
saying is, can't you sort of like
responsibly-
reflect
So
upon
the
the
example
situation
that
you're
Richard
situated
Swinburne gives here is of like Sherlock Holmes and his whatever his assistant guy is. You're British, you probably know this. Who is the Sherlock Holmes assistant guy?
Watson.
Well, yeah. He's Sherlock Holmes has they've got all these data pieces in front of them. Watson can't figure it out. But then when Sherlock Holmes gives them this sort of hypothesis that makes sense around the data, it's not wrong for Watson to say, "Oh yeah, actually now that really does make sense." So yeah, I think that just because you sort of come to it only in light of getting this information, in light of this historical information, I don't think that really changes the epistemic standard, other than the fact that you just have to be careful that you're not double counting, like you said.
Okay. I was raised in the Soviet Union, and I read all the Soviet textbooks and things. And I think that Marxism is completely true. But I don't think that pointing out that I've only read all the Soviet textbooks and I was raised in a Soviet school is actually any evidence against me, because Swinburne has this thing that he says. And so I shouldn't reflect upon my epistemic situation.
I didn't say I didn't. I said I do think you should reflect on your epistemic situation. I don't think that automatically means that if you're then looking at it a priori and says, hey, does this make sense with regards to being theism?
Oh yeah, a priori, all my intuitions are that Soviet Union.
But my intuitions really do point in the directions that
mine really do. That Soviet Union is true.
Yeah, intuitions are socially constructed.
To some extent.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to religions, to a pretty big extent.
Did the first human not, or first sect of humans not have intuitions? I mean, yeah, if you mean like nowadays with religion, maybe they did. But
I mean, if they had intuitions, there is no way for us to reconstruct them, right? Because
although
they don't speak English.
although our intuitions go against solipsism, and so if that's socially constructed, then there can't be a society to shape it if solipsism is true in the first place. So, I mean, there has to be something a bit more fundamental than that. But you're not wrong overall.
I don't know.
Just,
I think
look at the diversity of intuitions when it comes to religions across all of the different religious systems in the world, right? Like people can only think of Mormonism and Islam, but like there are hundreds and hundreds of religious systems in just Papua New Guinea, and they are all completely different because the communities are like physically separated by valleys and
there are cultures that don't even have anger as like. We think of like anger as something. It's internally so intuitive, and some cultures do not have anger at all.
So some cultures don't have like the past tense; they only have like the present tense and the future tense.
Yeah.
So some cultures have grammatical genders that like cluster colors and emotions and actions and animals in. Like according to an algorithm or pattern that we have absolutely no way of understanding, it's like apparently completely random, but for them it's natural. So there is something that they are picking out in the world that makes them cluster things in this specific way into grammatical genders that we can't just.
They have the true intuition, Camille, because Swinburne said this thing.